Today I'm speaking with Leadership Coach Katherine Golub. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for the invitation to have this conversation with you.
Absolutely. So, Katherine, I'd love to start with this. You talk about your work as helping leaders see the systemic roots of conflict. And
Hmm.
that suggests that what we experience as conflict is often part of something much larger.
Yeah.
So, where are you seeing that most vividly right now?
Mm. Seeing it in all sorts of ways right now. I'll just say that in addition to being a leadership coach, I'm also a city councilor. And I think when we zoom out vividly, I mean, I honestly I think about Iran, I think about Minneapolis, I think about Chicago, I think about when I think about what's most vivid for me when I think about conflict, I think about these really heartbreaking conflicts in the world. Those aren't the conflicts that my clients are coming to me. They're grappling with perhaps the grief and anxiety of those larger conflicts, and they are usually working within their communities to around organizing and activism and leading their communities toward some type of social change. The conflicts that they come to me for support with are often within their teams or their organizations or their coalitions or interpersonally between a boss and an employee or employee and a boss. They're typically those workplace conflicts, but they're definitely feeling, as am I, the more global national conflicts that are, you know, wreaking havoc on lives and also really having an impact on people's nervous systems as well.
Mm-hmm. So, on many levels, many layers of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Can you take me into a recent moment with a leader where you could feel they need to see the systemic roots of conflict? What was
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah. I'm going to pause and think of a specific situation.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm pausing to think through a few
Of
different,
course.
like I'm scanning different client situations right now. Um, Oftentimes my clients come to me because they are lacking clarity in, so a lot of my clients, when I think of my clients and what's really up for them right now, a lot of them are coming to me because they're naming it as a lack of clarity. They're burned out, right? And they've been working really, really hard to create change in their communities. And they often come to me grappling with the internal conflict, this question of, do I stay where I am right now or do I leave? And typically when we think about burnout, I think a lot of people think about it being from overwork, and from doing too much or not having balance, not having work life balance. And that is certainly the case. But what I've discovered over the years is that oftentimes what really pushes people to leave their workplaces is when is because of some organizational conflict, some conflict with their team, and they often don't name it as conflict. It's a tension, it's people problems. It's like being exhausted or frustrated from dealing with the annoyance of humans, right? But as I think about a specific situation right now, one systemic root. So I have a client who's been really grappling with the burnout and is a team lead in their organization, and one of the things that we've had to work on is the pattern of parentification. So when I think of systems, I think zooming out to see, we might have this problem, for example, burnout in the workplace, but what happened to you earlier in life? For the family of origin is one system, right? Our internal parts are another system. There are, the organization of the team. Those are systems. So keep listing different types of systems, but often early family patterns influence how we show up. And parentification is a systemic pattern that I see a lot of my clients, including a client who's that I'm currently working with, show up. And that's the pattern where if your parents aren't able to be fully present to you when you're a young person, say their parents passed away early in life and they didn't receive the support that they needed to really hold that and process through that grief, or something else happened and they weren't able to fully take on the role of parent, it's like there's a vacuum. Either you can say there's a child, a parent, and a grandparent. There's either a vacuum above the place of the parent, their parent wasn't able to be there, and so the child kind of gets sucked into the role of parenting their parent, or if the parent isn't able to be present, the child can get sucked into the role of parenting themselves or their siblings. And that's a pattern that I find a lot of my clients come to me with, that leads to that overwork, and that can also lead to those tensions between people, like a lot of resentment, like I'm doing all these things for you, why aren't you also carrying the load of the weight of the load. So that's one systemic pattern that immediately comes to mind when I think about
Huh.
clients are grappling with.
So they're coming to you with a complaint about,
Uh-huh.
why do my team not step up? Why are they not
Uh-huh.
taking on
Yeah.
their tasks? And
Yeah.
so, how do you start helping leaders see the pattern?
Yeah. So there's a couple. So how to start helping them see the pattern. Um, okay. So there's three things that come up to mind, and feel free to interrupt me if this is more than just starting. But first, in starting with any client, these are anytime that we are working to heal trauma, we need to start at the beginning with resonance, because the lack of a parent figure, or this is intergenerational trauma. There's this is trauma. Trauma is what happens. One of my favorite teachers, Sarah Payton, defines in more words than this, but this is she's the person I learned this from. Trauma is when we go through a difficult experience and we are too alone in it. So humans are capable of doing very hard things, but when we are too alone in it, it's when it becomes trauma in the brain. And we could talk more about that if you'd like. But in order to prevent and to heal trauma, we need to know that we're not too alone. So resonance is that moment when you say something to me and I respond to you in a way that makes you say, yeah, you get me. You're here with me. You understand me. I am seen and heard and understood by you. That's the moment of resonance. And before we do anything else, I need to be able to come into a place of resonance with my clients. And that's through using language, first starting with my body and with my physical unspoken presence, but then using certain language that helps them to feel heard.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Can you describe a moment, what you felt in your body when a client expressed something that felt like there was something deep underneath that?
Yeah. There's three different feelings that I've learned to notice. One is confusion. So before a client session, I will notice how I'm feeling in my body, because to know my own baseline, right? And so as my body sensations change in a session with clients, I know that it's because of how I'm attuning to the client. I am often picking up on things that they're feeling. So if I start to feel confused, like this isn't making sense to me, I will often say we need to constellate this. We need to use one of the methodologies that I integrate into my work to help people see systemic patterns is called systemic constellations. So I will say we need to put that down. Another sensation that I sometimes feel is boredom. I'm like, this has been said before, right? If I'm like, I've heard you say this story multiple times, or I can just tell that they've said it to someone else. They're speaking about what is known. And systemic work is about, and healing is about naming what has been unnamed, making the implicit, the unconscious conscious. So I know if I'm starting to feel bored, which I don't typically do, there's something else in the room that's not being spoken. And another sensation is just chills, or like I just get this feeling of, ooh, like, ooh, this is, we are touching something. We are in alignment here. So let's follow this. This is of significance. I'm sure
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of other sensations, but those are three that occur to me right now.
Uh-huh. So these three feelings, any one of them, are signals to you that there's something significant going on here that we should explore.
Yeah.
For the sake of our listeners, could you describe briefly the constellations?
Yeah. Yeah. So systemic constellations, originally known as family constellations, sometimes called organizational constellations. Systemic constellations is a methodology that has its roots with the Zulu people of South Africa and was further developed by a German man named Bert Hellinger. And it's very common in the Netherlands and Germany. When I lived in Oaxaca, Mexico, people did constellations all the time. I was like, oh, I thought that was about astrology. I didn't know what it was. It's not about astrology, although you could do constellations with the planets. That's another system. Systemic constellations is a methodology that helps to make the implicit explicit through several ways of working, including three-dimensionalizing an issue. Originally, like the OG constellations, originally constellations were
G.
um, original, the original constellations. Sorry, my son is 18, so this is the original form, the original way of doing constellations was gathering, and it still is often practiced this way, gathering people in a workshop. People come together for a day in a workshop, and the facilitator will say, "Who wants to do a bit of work?" And the, people will raise their hand. The facilitator will choose a client. The client will sit next to the facilitator. The facilitator, yeah.
I want to cut to the chase, which is if you could describe that people move around in a three-dimensional
I
way to
I'm
describe.
almost there. Yeah, but I think that this part is important. I could cut there. Three people move around, but I'm almost there. Is that okay if I? So, the facilitator will work with the client. The client will say what their issue is, and the facilitator will say, "Okay, given what you're telling me, please choose two or three people to represent different parts of the different elements within the system." So, for example, choose yourself and your mother. That's traditional, but you can put any elements, yourself and shame, yourself and your challenge, yourself and your boss, or and people will sensing the field, sensing the information that comes to them. Representatives will move in the field, and then through using resonant language and several questions, insight will emerge. But you can use, in addition to using representatives, you can also do this in the mind's eye with blocks, with pieces of paper, on a computer screen. So that's one element of systemic constellations is the three-dimensional representation of the challenge.
Right. And just for the purpose of people who aren't familiar, it is this idea about the 3D representation, whether it's using people and moving them around or whether it's using those little wooden blocks
House. Mhm.
representing people. And then the people can move around, which is representative of the relationships that they either have or that you want them to have, right?
Yes, and typically the way that I practice is moving based on the information that we're receiving somatically. Not this is how I want it to look, but what is here now with the principle of change begins by honoring what is. And so when we can see what is currently, we can see what's been missing or unnamed or where we've been conflating two things with each other. And that can
Okay.
help us discover how we can move to that picture of what we want.
Okay. When you said earlier that insight will emerge, can you take me into a moment of a constellation where you saw insight emerge and what was that?
So, mm,
Or just an example?
yeah, I'm thinking about like 2 days ago, a client session. I think that I would have consent to share this situation because I won't name any specifics. But someone is trying to discern whether to take, whether to apply for a new position and has a lot of anxiety about really longing for stability and has a passion for long-term movement building and also is they have their they have their PhD and they could, it's an academic position. And there's a certain paid stability. There's a certain stability that comes with the paycheck of working with an academic institution. And so asked them to to grab objects, random objects in their room to represent. First, we represented themselves and stability. And then what they realized as they looked at it, they're like, oh, actually, there's fast stability and there's slow stability. So I said, okay, grab something else. What does this one on the table represent? And they said it's fast stability. I said, okay, grab something else to represent slow stability. And they could see how they were pointed in slightly different directions. So there were other steps to this constellation, but that often discernment, the word discernment, the roots of that means separating one thing from another, to be able to see clearly. And so there's a lot that's wrapped up in a word like stability or like conflict. These are big words that need unpacking. And by unpacking fast stability and slow stability, they could choose more which to prioritize and have more clarity as they consider applying for this job.
Lovely.
Yeah, yeah, it was,
So,
and it's fun. It's like, oh, I don't know what's going to emerge there. It feels lovely every time I get to practice. Yeah.
mhm. For the purpose of our listeners, could you say more about honoring what is?
Yeah. That's a huge question and I love it. I love it. So I'm
Doesn't
gonna,
have to be this big, just
yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to figure out which piece. Okay. So, and there's a lot that we could say about honoring what is, but what occurs to me in this moment is that dominant culture has a tendency toward skipping things over, not feeling hard emotions. And when really hard things happen, not only are we not, not only is it just hard to feel the things, we're also trained not to feel the things, so we often don't have capacity to feel them. And so, oftentimes in constellations, what we discover needs naming are events or people or things that have happened that weren't fully grieved. And because it's sadness is painful. And so we tend to move quickly past it. And so when things are not fully grieved, it's as though it's as though there's a cut in the fabric of the system, any system. And this can be organizationally when someone's, fired or has to depart very quickly, and there's not a well-held departure, or the mother's mother dies, right? And they're not able to fully grieve that. There's like a cut in the fabric. And then it can create patterns that the next generation, the next person that is hired, or two people down who's hired, or the children, they can still feel that there's something wrong and there's behavioral patterns that they're using to cope with this thing that they might not even knew happened. And so often the main move in constellations is naming what happened in a way that honors it. So I define honoring as recognizing with respect. That happened, period, um, period, moment of silence, right?
mhm.
And that by honoring what is, it's as though that whatever was not spoken about, that page in the history book that we tried to tear out, is able to be reintegrated And there's a wholeness there that then we can move
Hmm.
forward with.
Can you describe what's happening in the room or what's happening in yourself when you get the sense that something has not been named here?
Yeah. I can feel it in my body right now. There's like a heightened vi I don't use the word heightened vibration that often, but it's like I can feel in my body there's like a charge. There's a electrical charge in my body. Or people might slow down, right? People have been talking, 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 and it's like, oh my, like moment, and people pause, people slow down. And then oftentimes you can see people are thinking and or there's stuff happening, right? Sighing, yawning, slowing down, crying. Often there's somatic indications that something is moving here. And that's the point. We're moving from stuckness toward the ability to be in flow and movement again.
Mhm. What happens to you inside when you notice this when somebody's crying or sighing or, like, oh my gosh, what happens to you inside when you're with
Mhm.
them?
I think I slow down, and I think there's just a feeling of awe and like I am the fact that I get to do this for my work is just it's there's just a sense of awe. There's a quietness. I'm not thinking, oh my God, I get to do this for my work. But there's like just and not like, oh my God, but it's like, yep. Also, I've learned over the years that intuition doesn't speak in many words. Intuition often sounds like, yep, nope, maybe, right? It's just like, yeah, here we are together in this and
Mhm. How
and
did you come
awaiting.
by your intuition?
Um, a lot of unpacking. I mean, it's been a gradual process. Um, Life woke me up at a quite a young age. Uh, I really shifted paths to start really being in relationship with my intuition when I was 25, and my partner was deported. And a couple months later, I discovered I was pregnant, and I moved to Oaxaca, Mexico, and I couldn't continue my I was working with a union, and it was a unionized position, so it was a really good job I loved very much. And giving birth, moving to Oaxaca, Mexico, at 25 and giving birth to my son, who is a huge surprise and the love of my life. And I couldn't continue my work with the union anymore while we worked to get his dad's visa. And I decided I was like, what do I want to do now? And I decided that I wanted to become a birth doula and a childbirth mentor and a yoga teacher. This was in 2008. It's actually his 18th birthday today. Um, and, and that began the process. So I'm usually in some training. I'm always doing some new type of work on unpacking and discovering more about myself. So it's been since that moment of deciding to take that leap to study those being with women and people birthing people and birth was the beginning of we could talk for hours about all the different things that have supported me, but yeah.
Birthing people in birth.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Say
Yep.
more. I mean, that sounds like a rich metaphor.
Oh, when I said birthing people, I mean people of any gender giving birth. I'm not birthing them. I was accompanying people, and I do think that being a birth accompanying people in birth is very similar. Like I source from the birth work I did 16 years ago, very much still in my work with clients. I don't love the word doula because of it means female servant and slave, but the being with someone in that way and the accompanying dueling way of being is very much how I, how am I in a constellation? I'm being there. I'm not the one giving birth. I'm the one supporting the process to emerge.
A word that comes to mind for me is midwife, and I wonder how that resonates for you.
Yeah. Well, so in birth, I was not a midwife, right? I wasn't in charge. I had no, um, I didn't have a medical role.
I,
Yeah.
I actually mean midwifing a process.
Yeah. Yeah. How does it feel for me? And I love midwifery. Um, I guess that could work. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Well, when I think of you facilitating constellation and
Yeah.
you're actually helping people see things
Yeah.
because you're allowing for things to emerge.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it feels to me
Yeah.
like you're midwifing this, something new is emerging here.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And the interesting thing about constellations work is it's naming what already is that we haven't been fully aware of. So that movement that's already wanting to move, right? This is about the flow of life and love, right? When there's stuckness, like life can't flow, naming that block, naming that cut in the fabric so that we can reweave it together or remember parts of the system that have been excluded and so that life can flow again.
Mhm.
Yeah.
May I ask you this
Yeah.
question? And if
Yeah.
it's too personal, just say so.
Go for it. Yeah.
Um, what did constellations legitimize for you that you were already sensing about your own development?
Hmm. Can you tell me more about the question? Like,
Um, Constellations are, so the way you've described it is naming what is that we haven't already been aware of.
yeah.
And you came across this methodology
Uh-huh.
of representing something in 3D to
Yeah.
understand the relationships between the parts.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if when you came across constellations, how did that resonate with what you were already sensing in your own development in terms
Yeah.
of being able to see a system?
Yeah. So what really pulled me to constellations was what I could see it could do for my clients, and it has transformed my own life. So what comes to mind is like why I want what it looks like. Oh wow. Like why the oh wow, why was I pulled to do it? What I had kept hearing, not that often, but sometimes clients like telling old stories. And I would, refer them to a therapist but I was like, what can I do to help in this? Like it might not need long-term therapy. It might just need something. And um when I saw constellations, I was like, okay, I think that can help. I'm always going to, right? And I'm always in some training, but the training is based on, okay, what's my learning edge? That's what I find really exciting. Like, what is my learning edge as a practitioner? And what is that piece? Also,
Welcome
another
to
thing
the
that
ripples of
kind of
change.
delegitimized something that I had preached for years and still believe for the most part, but it's nuanced now, is that, my clients, the number one word they say that they want when they come to me is clarity. And that might be clarity, but they're burned out. And what do I do next? It might be conflict and clarity. How do I respond to this? Right. And I would say, and they would often ask the question, why am I doing this thing? Right. Why am I acting in this way? It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm doing the things I don't want to do. I'm not doing the things I want to do. And I would say, you don't need to know why. You just need to know what you want and take steps toward it. And that is true, like maybe 70, 80% of the times. Like that is actually really true a lot of the times. But then there would be times where people were like, they'd be stuck in the same things. And what I've discovered over the years of practicing and studying constellations is that sometimes we do need to point to the past. Sometimes we do need to see what happened that started this trajectory of stuckness or this pattern within my organization or my family. And so it actually, I don't say that. I don't preach anymore. You don't need to know why. You don't need to look at the past. A lot of times we don't, but sometimes we do. And that's not what first drew me to constellations, but it's been a really important learning over the years.
That's really interesting. So there's the well, you don't need to know why versus yeah, sometimes we do need to know why.
Yeah.
How do you know which way to go?
Well, first of all, I love the two hands. It just makes me think of polarities and like the knowing and the not knowing. And polarities are a key pattern that often keep like the not seeing of the two sides that often keep people stuck in conflict. So I love that. How do I know which way to go? I know because my clients typically experience pretty quick movement forward, right? It's not like they go from being confused to having the job right away, but they're doing the practices. They're like, oh, I discovered this thing. I had that really good conversation. Oh, this it's all the baby gates that I say, like the moment, the little decisions, the little choices over time, people are in movement. But if they're not, if like there's a thing that they keep bringing to multiple sessions, that's the priority, but they're not moving forward with it, that's not that's not the typical thing. So I know that there's something else that we haven't seen. And that's the thing, in conflicts, typically, I work in city politics. I'm a city councilor, and oftentimes people get into drama with each other, less so now, but like they get into drama. And the key thing is, what do you, it's typically people get into drama because something's gone unsaid. There's something they don't know about. Same thing with stuckness. If you're stuck, what is it that we're not seeing together? And let's constellate it. Let's look at it to be able to shed light on what's happening.
Mhm. So when the city councilors don't see the systemic roots of the conflict, what usually happens?
It's typically they don't typically need constellations. The counselors, it's there's moments where I think constellations could be helpful, like when there's patterns of in my municipality, there's been a pattern of school committee members joining with superintendents, like having some affinity for them when their role really should be separate. So there are patterns that come up, but typically when city councilors or other people in local politics aren't seeing things, it's typically because they're not pausing to ask questions and listen to each other. And there's many more, there's consolations aren't always what's needed. Often what's needed is to pause and ask questions and listen better. And
Right.
yeah,
So what usually happens if they don't see it without looking
yeah,
at the methodology? So there's the school committee affinity with superintendents or whatever. What is the drama? What usually happens? What's the outcome of the
gosh,
drama if they don't see the systemic roots?
yeah. Again, it may not be systemic, the roots, but like if they don't ask questions and see what's going on, they will gossip. people, people, and this is not just in my city. This is in a workplace. Like I'm instead of having the patience and maturity and dedicating the time and the courage it takes to have the conversation with the person you're struggling with, they'll take it elsewhere, right? They'll talk to other people about it. And then there's this like, there can be an in-group feeling like, ooh, you're gossiping with me. I don't know if it's dopamine or oxytocin or what it is, but it's that, oh, we're an in-group now, and that feels really good. And there can be a demonization of other people that right, a categorization, like they're bad, we're good. I'm not going to even take the time to talk with them then, when typically, I mean, I have all sorts of really positive collaborative relationships with people I disagree with vehemently, but I don't demonize them, and therefore we're able to vote differently, but sometimes actually work together on the same thing.
Uh-huh. So demonization kind of sounds like there's an us versus them emerging.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Absolutely. I could that's a huge thing. Um, one of the one principle of Constellations work is that there's like, and one of the things that I feel called to do is to translate this work. So there's a unit conscience is how Bert Hellinger called it. We need other language because that doesn't make sense to me. But there's this force that is like an exclusionary force that says this is who belongs within these boundaries and that's who doesn't belong. This behavior is acceptable, that behavior is not acceptable. And that's important. We need clear boundaries. But then there's a systemic conscience. Again, I'm trying to figure out how to translate this. There's this other force that is like an inclusionary force that when we push something into the shadows, when we don't recognize something, then those patterns can, then those things insist on being included, like a boomerang. When you don't want to act like your mother, well, if you reject, then you're probably certain to act like your mother. And so the people who honestly, our city council has transformed amazingly in the last few years, but there can be a not that this is anger rejection, but then that same person is acting in that in in ways that they don't want to see, right? In ways that they wouldn't admit to,
Mhm.
because they're not familiar with their own shadow.
Mhm. Again, to make this clear for our listeners,
Yeah.
it's sounding to me like, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if we don't see and acknowledge the patterns, then they're likely to come back and
Yes.
bite us or
Yes.
come back and reappear in another way.
Yes.
Yes, say something about that.
Mm.
I mean, I think that's what you said.
It is what I said. Yeah. I'm trying to think of an example. Um, there's so many different examples. I mean, I think about the roots of this country and slavery and genocide, and that's the origin of an organization or of any body, including a nation. Um, if it's not honored, like recognized with respect, it'll keep and major events within a history of a nation or an organization or any body, a family, if they're not named, they'll keep coming back. And more than so much of what organizers and activists are in this country who are working toward racial justice want, and this is not the only thing that is wanted, but one of many things that is wanted is an honoring of the history, is like a recognition this happened. So, like the investigations into the boarding schools in Canada and the discovery of massacres of children, it's not enough. It's not the only step to name like there are these unmarked graves, but that step reintegrating those pages of history until the pages of history are not in the book, are not named and honored, then we can't move. Then it's very hard to move forward.
Great example. And just to clarify that the boarding schools were for the indigenous, the First Nation of
Yeah.
Canada, for the indigenous, because they took the kids away from their parents and put them in the boarding schools, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, for naming
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Well, the interest of time, you and I think we could go on talking about these things for a long time. As we begin to wrap up, I'd like to ask you, what does this work demand of you?
Sleep. It demands that I take really good care of my body. And, I'm in perimenopause now. I started with and like had a bout of very bad insomnia like a year and a half ago. And so demands a lot of supplements, and acupuncture and sleep. It also demands joy. That was my commitment starting at the beginning of the year. And I hadn't danced for like a decade. And I have been I have been dancing since then. This is now 2026. Yeah, all types of dance, especially Latin, salsa, bachata, kizomba, etc. Yep. Um, so I need to sleep. I need to walk in the mornings. I need to dance. Those things are sometimes in tension with each other, but and it requires that I walk my talk. And
Oh,
being on city, I mean, I can't be. I need to do. I need to practice what I preach. And so being on city council is like fantastic opportunity for me to have my feet to the fire, not just in my own practice, which can be quite comfortable, but out in that leadership role in the world. I feel like that's part of what I do. Why I It's a small reason why I do it. So I can, yeah. I live by a community farm in a beautiful place. So yeah, the walks.
mm. Katherine, thank you for bringing your presence to this conversation.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, uh, this was delightful. I really, it's a, it's a gift. I've been wanting to do more podcasts and really bringing Constellations work to a US audience more. And so your invitation to have this conversation is a real gift to, especially right after I got back from a training in the Netherlands, and just really timely. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Thank you.